Good morning everyone out there in YouTube land. My name is Jared and this is my channel, Mazda B3K. In this video we're going to pick up on part 2 of the battle for the 5.4, where we're actually going to start tearing into the engine in attempt to remove and replace the intake gaskets, which I believe are what has failed to cause all this issue. Alright, first things first, the doghouse has to come out, which is this portion here. It'll give us access to the back of the engine. So in this application there are 4 latches that have to come loose first. There's one here, you just pull it forward like that, and then you can get the hook out. And then this one down here is a little more interesting. You have to flip this out and then twist, and that will extend the latch a little bit so that you can actually lift it up, get it out. So there's 4 of these, 1, 2, and then there's another 2 on the other side. And then what's supposed to happen is you can just kind of pull up and then out on the doghouse. You're going to want to slide your front seats as far back as they will go to give you some room to maneuver. Now I think in my situation, based on what I'm seeing, I think also I'm going to have to take this panel off, and then the panel under the steering wheel, under the steering column. Try to get this out, because when I've tried to move this, as you can see, it catches. So I don't think I can wiggle this out otherwise, but I'll bring it back when I find out. Okay, got it off. So welcome to the back of the engine and the transmission. We did have to pop this panel off, and all it is some push pins. So you just pop the push pins off, comes off. Same thing over here, some push pins, pop that off. Once they're off, the doghouse comes right out. And I was just doing a quick visual inspection, and there you go. This is a chunk of the lower intake. It's this part right here. I can feel it falling apart in my hands. And even more weirdly, I don't know what's going on here, but see that? That's wide open. That is completely wide open. I don't know what's going on there, but you've got the bottom of what you see there is the head, and the top is supposed to be the intake, but the intake doesn't go all the way over. I don't know if it is the wrong intake, or if it broke, or what's going on, or somebody swapped the heads. I don't know, but that is wide open. That would explain the monster vacuum leak and why this thing's running insanely lean. And then we've got this plastic that, you know, I can just breaks in my hand. So that's our problem. It is definitely a failure of the intake. Now it's a matter of just getting in here and starting to take it all apart, because we've got to get it to where the upper intake can be pulled free, which means we've got vacuum, we've got the IAC that's got to come out. This is part of the evap purge system, I'm pretty sure, and that's got to move. I think that's a diaphragm. That might, yeah, that's got to go. We've got this big nest of vacuum lines. It's got to go. These are your this is either fuel or this is transcooler lines. I'm not sure which it is. But we gotta kind of get these out of the way. Oh man. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of mess that's gonna have to come out of the way. And we're also gonna have to get at some stuff on the front side of the intake as well. So I'm gonna grab my toolbox and I'm gonna bring it around and sit it down on the ground outside here and get some paper towels so I don't get everything nasty. Get to it. But I am relieved to see that my theory was correct. We have a massive failure of the intake. But now my next question is, I mean, seeing what I see over there with the upper intake, am I going to have to scrounge up an upper intake real quick? Because the original intakes for this year were supposed to be metal. But that doesn't look like something's missing. That's like it's straight up the wrong part. Like somebody swapped the intake or somebody swapped the head. Something like that. Let me look at this. Yeah, that's absolutely the head. Wow. I mean, and there's a bolt hole there, and that is wild. I'll be able to tell if somebody swapped a head because 99 and above, they changed the shape of the ports on the intake on the head to let it breathe better. And that was some of the reason why you got a power boost and a torque boost out of the 5.4 after 2 years. And so they're two very different shapes, and I can look at that once the upper intake's off and see if somebody did something silly with that. If not, I gotta understand why this is so off.
You are full.
Alright guys, so we're gonna pull, this is part of your evap purge system. It's just a pair of 10mm bolts. We're gonna pull that off. Before we do, we're gonna work on getting this hose out of the way. That's gonna be in this vacuum line out of the way, so we're gonna work that off. We're gonna loosen that spring clamp. You may need a pick and some silicone spray to get in and get these hoses out of the way so that we can make some room. But just need to do that, and then I'll bring you back. I'm running low on space on my phone here, so it'll be a little bit more abbreviated than usual as I work into this. Okay, so we've got the evap thing off. Disconnected its power, disconnected a vacuum, and in my case, these hoses are not great. They'll do okay, but they're making a giant mess on my hands. Vacuum line's okay though. And now I'm starting to work on getting other things free. This is another vacuum breather line. Another vacuum line. Be careful when you take it off. In my case, I think this thing was already cracked and rotted, but it shot. So I'm gonna have to come up with some kind of a boot, maybe a spark plug boot or something that's gonna go from this to there, not leak. I have to come up with something. So anyway, next target of opportunity to free stuff up. Oh, yeah, this was supposed to sit like this. I keep seeing signs. It's supposed to sit like that. I keep seeing signs that somebody was in here before me. We're gonna find out and see how that all turns out, but yeah, somebody was playing back here, and I don't know who. Oh man, it's gonna be so much fun removing the fuel injectors. Anyway, what I'm going for now is there's this this chunk of vacuum harness that you can remove that's all wrapped around the intake. So I'm gonna work on getting that out. Next step is the IAC, which is right here. So I think some 8s. Get that out of the way. And also remember, guys, you will have to come around the front and disconnect stuff as well. So I may have to pop out and disconnect the other side of the IAC as we do that. So anyways, I like to say onward. Alright guys, so I've taken the airbox out. And what that turns out to be is you got a pair of 8mm here. You have a pair of 8mm here. Do not forget to disconnect the math. It's right here. Then this needs to come out too. But to get this out, there is a clamp. See if I can get you into it. Hang on. Get you off the tripod. There's a clamp right there. You have to get at it from the back side. Do that. It's actually that clamp there. Do that, and then you should be able to slide this whole assembly out. Don't forget to remove the IAT connector. Let's talk about some other stuff. So, in order to get the intake out, and you can see it more clearly from up here, but we're going to have to lift the fuel injectors out. Really, the correct way to do this is to loosen the fuel rails and then lift the injectors and get that entire assembly out of there. We're going to have to disconnect the fuel lines. So, I guess it's kind of backdating, but when you start doing all this, you're going to need to drain your coolant, and you're going to need to make sure you have no fuel pressure, which in my case, I've already done both of those things. So we got to do all that. Got to disconnect the ECT, which is right there. Your thermostat's here. This is your water neck. Thermostat housing, what do you want to call it? So this hose has to come off. I would leave that there. If you've got a newer 5.4, this is an integrated thing, and the bolts are in upside down, and it's really stupid, and it's super annoying. But on this older one, you can still swap it fairly easily. So we got to get the fuel rails off. We got to get the fuel injectors out, which means we have to take all their electrical out. We're going to have to take the ignition coils out and all their electrical, both sides. So you just got to start digging in. Now, if you're in a truck, you've got more room to do the digging. This is a van, so you're going to see me pull some extra junk out that you may not need in a truck application. But I'm just going to keep digging because this is going to take me a while, and I'll update you along the way. All right. So here's what we look like once we have the cover off the throttle body, and you can get that off. It slides right off once you get the rest of the air intake out of the way. There's a clamp at the throttle body. Mine was sticky, so I took the clamp apart, and then I got a pick up and around the lip and loosened up enough of it that I could pull it free. So here's where we stand. We now have more access over here to taking care of the electricals on the fuel injectors and the ignition coils, so we can start doing that. The IAC can get pulled out the back now, but what you also got to do, the TPS sensor will have to be disconnected. We're going to have to disconnect the cruise, the pedal throttle, and the return spring. I got to figure out how to take those off. I don't know if they just pop off or there's a trick to it, and I do not want to break it. So I got to figure that out. There are 4 bolts that hold the throttle body in place because the throttle body itself's got to come out. 3 of them can be accessed from the back. That 4th one there is hidden behind the throttle cables. So if you get that throttle bracket out of the way, then you've got a pretty good shot at it, and you can finish getting the throttle body out of the way, which is going to be a requirement, like I said, to get this intake out. And don't forget, you got to come up with some kind of a solution for the EGR there in the back. I think what I'm going to do is just disconnect it from the throttle body and let it hang out and work around it, because I really don't want to start playing with the rusty exhaust bits, because those generally are not very nice to you. All right, figured this out. So this, to get that straightened out, which I hope this is the, okay, good. That's the pedal throttle. That you just turn the throttle mechanism back a little bit and then slide that out. This is your cruise control throttle cable, and I broke that because I thought it just popped off. It doesn't pop off, it slides off. So it's sitting right there and you're supposed to slide it out. So again, that's a turn this a little bit and then slide it off. I didn't do that, so I broke it. I do have the other piece and some, I believe, some plastics epoxy, and we'll be good to go. Got to fix that correctly. And then the return spring is pretty easy to pop off. So this is all isolated now, and I can take this bracketry off and keep working on getting the throttle body off. All right, we got our first major success. Throttle body is out. As I mentioned, it is 4 bolts, and I'm screwing them back into the intake so I don't lose them. 3 are short, 1 is long. It's pretty easy to tell what's it's because there's a big shoulder on the long one. So bring you up to date what's going on in the actual engine bay. As you can see, things are getting more clear in here. It's a little easier to see. EGR was a pair of 10mm, and they were a little sticky. Exhaust tends to be that way. EGR is this guy right here. So I busted loose. Basically, I put a deep well 10mm attached to a 1/2 drive, and I asked it to move, so it moved. And I've gone ahead. I have disconnected all of the coils and injectors on this side, and I just finished doing it over here. You may see a bunch of bolts that are sticking up, and what I'm doing is, as I'm taking stuff off, I am putting the bolts back where it went so I don't lose bolts and I know where things go. And that's pretty much the big update. I've got some vacuum stuff off. Where we are now is it's time to deal with the fuel. So there's a few more things to take off the top of the intake. But we need to deal with disconnecting the main fuel lines in the back from the inside. And then we got to unscrew, these are 8mm. But we got to unscrew the fuel rails and then pull everything back and out so that it's off the intake. And then when that is done, that will free up the coils to be removed. We don't have to remove the injectors, but we do got to pull the coils. And when we do lift the fuel rails, we got to be careful that we don't lose the O-rings for the fuel injectors. They're hats, basically. Oh, actually, no, the whole thing's got to come out. So we don't want to lose their bottoms. That's what we don't want to lose. And you may need to replace them depending on how squished out they are. This is the map sensor bracket. It went right here. It's a pair of 10s. Just kind of got that out of the way. So we are making progress. It's slow but steady. Slow but steady. And then it'll be interesting to see what the inside of this looks like once I take it loose. This coolant hose, because it's quite crunchy. When they're crunchy like that, it's time for new ones. So I have those on the way. Alright, fuel injectors are out. So, a couple things to know when you're going to pull it. You get those 8 bolts out, that's fantastic. You've got a flexible hose in the back, use it. The left side will come out easy, or the driver's side comes out easy. The passenger side is a war. You got to work your way around the transmission dipstick bracket. What I wound up doing is I took the bolt out up there where I kept it so I wouldn't lose it. That gave me some wiggle room. I also saw that I was going to need to remove this hose here. So I got that removed. And once I did that, I leveraged the fact that the hose in the back that connects the two sides of the rail, or the two rails, is really flexible. And so I just kind of wiggle twisted, and I managed to get everything out without having to remove the injectors from the rail. Before you do all that, you do need to disconnect the actual main fuel lines. The big one is a 5/8 That's the intake or the fuel in, and then the return is a 1/2. You need quick disconnect tools. Here's an example. I got these at the local Harbor Freight. They work fine. You can also get the style that's just a cone, so you can get in the tighter spaces. The secret to these, before you guys go hog wild and destroy something, because it's easy to do, is make sure where this is supposed to slip in to dislodge the spring that acts as a tensioner that keeps it together. Make sure that's clean. That doesn't have a bunch of dirt or whatever impacted in it. Get that out, and then you can slide this in, and you'll get it seated. And then what you have to do is push the other side in. So if you're going to wind up, you clip onto this side, and then you're going to push this towards your disconnect, and you'll feel it slide just a little bit more. You push the two sides together, and once you feel it give a little bit and slide a little bit, then you can pull it out, because then it slipped in enough to disconnect. If you just sit there and you slide it in and you just try to pull and pull and pull and pull, you're going to break it. Ask me how I know. I've been there. So, I have given first blood for the work today, so we should be successful. A blood sacrifice has been given. And at this point, I'm going to put my little bolt back up over there so I don't lose my positioning, and I may have to slide that on later because that bracket's just a real stinker. But now we need to remove the keeper bolts on the coils, because the coils need to come out. Now, if you're a stickler and a purist, you should match the coil to the plug, so you need to mark mark it so you know which one goes where. I am replacing these, just preventative. This vehicle is 25 years old, so has the original coils, and they're probably perfectly fine. But I've already dug in this deep. I already have this much access. I'm going to go ahead and replace them. So I'm not doing that. 7mm, get them out. You do not need to remove the spark plugs. So I also got spark plugs because, again, I'm here. It's easy to do, so I can do it. Spark plugs go in the cylinder heads, so you do not need to remove spark plugs to get the intake out. Alright, so we get those out, and then we're actually down to the bolts that hold the intake in. And we're going to have some fun challenges, such as this hose has got to be disconnected, because I think this metal pipe is pressed into the intake down there, looks like. And I don't want to play with that. And we're going to have to work around the EGR, because the other end of that is in the exhaust manifold, and I don't want to play with that. You don't play with exhaust unless you have to. And we're just going to keep working our way forward. Alright, folks. Got a coolant line in the back off that I talked about a moment ago. This is your main upper radiator hose. I got it off. Remember, if your hose seems like it's welded in there, take a pick and get under there and break it loose from the metal it's clamped to, and eventually you'll get it out. I took this little guide thing off. We think that's mostly rust. The coolant system didn't look like it was really milkshake, but it could very well be the oil is getting in the coolant. I'll have a better idea of what's going on once the intake's up. And speaking of that, I think we're down to our last couple things. There is, so this needs to come out right here, and because this is connected to the alternator. So we take that up, that's a 10, and then after that we're down to the actual intake bolts. There are a string of 8mm bolts that run down the middle. There are a string of 10mm bolts that run down either side. You're going to need a ratchet and an extension and probably a deep well socket. And you're just gonna have to work your way down. I would do the front, the front ones from the front, a couple from the back, and then at that point you should be able to break this loose. Be mindful, you may have some coolant sloshing around where you don't expect it. That's the whole point of doing this, is because something has failed and gone wrong, and things have gone where they should not go. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that, you know, you have to slide this sucker out the back or in the cabin, and if you got a nice interior like I do, be mindful, lay out paper towels, whatever, so that you don't trash your interior. Alright folks, this is what it looks like once you get it out. As you can see, there's like a noise vibration harshness shroud that was around the lower intake. It's completely disintegrated, so I need to clean all that up. When I look at the actual gaskets, that's cooling. That's where your thermostat goes, right there. If you look right there, that looks like it's a failure of the gasket, if it will focus. It's being mean to me and not focusing. See right there? That's a fail. Right there. So that was letting coolant where it should not go. And if we go look in the back, there's a couple of similar circumstances, and I'm pretty sure that that's not because of separating the intake. I don't think these gaskets do that. I think that's a legitimate failure. So we pulled it out the front, and in order to do that, you got to take the alternator out. If you've not done it before, the tensioner is down there on the passenger side of things. You get a 1/2 drive in it. Pull it clockwise, so you're going to pull it up to the right kind of thing, and that will let you get the belt off. And once you get the belt off, there are two 10mm bolts, and there's one up top. Take those out, and then the alternator comes out pretty easily. There's one more 10mm nut on the main power connection. Take that off, get it out of the way, and then as long as you separate the upper and lower intake, it works out pretty well. On that note, there are 8 10mm bolts, got them laid out here, that are gonna on the perimeter of the upper intake, the one that looks like a spider, and then there are 8 bolts that are along the middle of that intake that connect it to the lower intake. Make sure you get 8 and 8. These are for your water neck and thermostat. That's what these are for. And this is the transmission dipstick bolt, I believe. So anyway, got that out. I'm gonna go ahead and replace both this line and this line because the hose is falling apart. And really this one needs to be replaced, but that's outside of the scope for today because I can get to that at any time. I just need to take the doghouse off. But as I was saying, if you look kind of back in here, I know there's a bunch of junk in the way. I think we had another failure back here possibly. What we found out is we're pretty sure that this being exposed was kind of a red herring, that this is not actually carrying anything. We're not sure why that was designed the way it is. We're going to verify that before, you know, start putting things back together. And I guess wouldn't be complete without having a nice look at the actual intakes themselves. So here's the lower, as you can see, completely contaminated with coolant in the oil. But I don't, and here's the actual gasket. I don't think any of this gasketry failed. This looks okay through here. Like I said, I'm pretty sure it failed here. See, this is just schmutz. This isn't gasket sealing surface. So if you take a look-see, that's where the thermostat goes, and it was over here is where it looked like it failed. But yeah, so I'm gonna stare at this to kind of understand what does what. so I can kind of visualize how coolant got into this thing. I have a new one of these. It is made out of metal, aluminum. There's going to be some stuff to transfer over. You have to transfer over this blocking plate with this sensor. I'm actually not sure what this sensor is all about, but it needs to be transferred. And now I'm just going to inspect everything for cracks and try to understand why this failed. I've got new gaskets, and we'll start laying things in. I'll call out torque values as I go. Just wanted to show you guys what to look for as far as failures. So right here, this is a failure. You can see that it's dark right there, and that the gasket itself, the sealing surface, has just been pushed to the side. So that is a failure point right there, where we had coolant crossing over into the intake. This is a cooling passage here, and I think that was it. And then this side also was not in great shape, so that actually was completely bulged out and displaced. So complete failure there. And then this one was heading that way. As you can see, it's dark brown. It had started to fail. It just wasn't as bad yet. This side, same deal. This side was actually okay. The other side, though, was heading south. But more alarmingly over here, this is done. That failed. So these are the original Ford gaskets, best I can tell. They have Ford and Motorcraft stamps on them. I don't know why they failed. This only has 65,000 miles on it. Could be manufacturing defects, could be the guy overheated it, could be that he didn't take care of the cooling system, and this thing has been, it's 25 years old. Could be any of those things, but I feel better in the sense that this is a verified failure of the intake gaskets that explains why coolant's getting into oil. So in theory, we get everything cleaned up, put it all back together, that problem's fixed, providing the head gaskets aren't torched. And the only way to truly verify that would be to take the heads off. And with this engine in this situation, if I take the heads off, I'm putting a new block in it, because that's a whole nother level of work. So anyway, onwards. We're gonna stuff rags in to keep stuff from getting into where the pistons and cylinders are. And we're gonna get this all shiny, and then we're gonna start putting it back together. Alright, I'm going to start putting the intakes back together. So this is my replacement intake. This one is aluminum. It is a Dorman 615285. Bear in mind, an aluminum lower is going to be a bit noisier than a plastic one, but it also won't crack and fail on you. So, trade-offs. Anyway, that is this. I'm going to continue with reassembly. I'll come back with torque values, because as delicate as this whole intake is, I'm going to make sure it's torqued to spec, every bolt. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to lay, now that I've got this all cleaned up, I'm going to lay the upper gaskets out. They have pins that will hold themselves in place. And then I'm going to set the lower intake in place and put the gasket on it. Again, there are pins that will hold it in place. You do not use RTV here. That's not the kind of gasket it is. So lay everything out, get the pins in, the guide pins in, and then start putting it back together. And I will bring you back when I get there and I got torque values, and we'll go over that. One thing, so if you've got a 97 like this one, there are two gaskets that are available for the 1997 year. There are those that were manufactured before July. Made before July of 97, and then the ones that were made after July of 97. There is a difference in those gaskets. The before and after, the guide pins are in different locations. The before July of 97, the guide pins are located inside of the seal. The after July of 97, they are located outside of the sealing surface. So pay attention to that. If you're using my video and say you have a 98, which this video also largely applies to. And this, this is also not just for van, but it's also for F-250, F-150, all of that. Other thing, so I pointed out, it's right here, I thought this was a major issue because we had this hole just not covered by the intake. It was just sitting there, and it was like, ah! And we did some poking, and that hole is a through and through. It empties out into the valley. It does not hold anything. It does not move coolant. It does not move air. It's just there, which is why the intake doesn't go back that far. But in order to save money, they kept the gasket symmetrical, and that setup is needed on the opposite front corner because that is where the thermostat goes. But it's not needed back here. So it's okay if your gasket covers that circular hole there, and then when you go to put the intake on, it only sits across about half of it. I'm toying around with the idea of trying to cut out the section that it doesn't need for seal, but I'm also very concerned I will damage my gasket. And I've also thought about taking a nice sharp knife and just smoothing away the sealing surface. Make sure we have a more solid seal around this coolant passage, but I think it's okay as is. We shall see. Bring it back. Alright, one thing to add here, don't forget to transfer this air actuator valve. I couldn't actually figure out what it does, but that's what it's called. So don't forget to transfer it if you're putting in a new intake. Pair of 8mm bolts. Make sure you lube the seal when you transfer. Alright, I'm not going to cover it in detail, but I did replace the spark plugs. I already have a video on my truck on how to replace the spark plugs. If you don't catch that video, the part number is TR Tango Romeo 55 Golf Papa GP, TR55 GP. You will need 8 of these. One good thing I saw when I took these out is, number one, they were basically brand new, what was in there. But I just swap plugs as a matter of course. These will be a nice backup, or maybe for a lawnmower or something. And what I was happy to see was the plug burn looked good. They weren't oil fouled, they weren't gas fouled, and they weren't sparkling clean. If I'd seen that, that would tell me coolant, or if I'd seen white crusties, that would have told me coolant was leaking into the combustion chambers, into the cylinders. I didn't see that. So that makes me feel good that the head gaskets are still okay. Because I'm not seeing external leaks. This tells me I don't have internal leaks. So what that leaves me with is a compression leak. And this thing sounded good when it ran. So I think, fingers and toes crossed, my head gaskets are okay. And it's just the lower intake gaskets are... Really, it's technically the upper intake gasket that gets you in trouble on this one. Anyway, doing that. Also going to do the thermostat because this thing, the cooling system it's not, I mean, it hasn't been maintained. It's not really leaking. I don't think it's milkshaking, but it hasn't been maintained. So, new thermostat, MU55779, and I've got a gasket to go with that. Alrighty, phone storage is almost full. I'll fix that tonight so that I can continue part 3 tomorrow. Our thermostat gasket is a Felpro. It is 35489. It goes on top of your thermostat. And always, always, always remember that when you are inserting a thermostat, the spring always points towards the block, regardless of the orientation that the thermostat's in. So this case is pretty easy to tell, but no, that is not correct. It needs to go in like this. And if you haven't done it, clean the crusties out from around here. I went ahead and did that. Make sure your jiggle valve's jiggling. That's kind of important. And then we'll just go ahead, put the new gasket in, and then I'll clean this water neck a little bit. It's kind of grody, and put this all back together. Good morning, everyone. Today is a new day. We're approaching the end of part 2. I've decided that the end of the part 2 video will be when we get the intake back in. So as you can see, I've put the lower more or less back into place. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to take the upper and we're going to get that back in place. But before I do that, these rags got to come out, and they've probably caught material. And to keep that material from falling off the rag down into the holes and go straight into the cylinders, I'm going to run my vacuum. Got this little portable vacuum, Harbor Freight vacuum. And I'm going to put some suction down there, so as the rag comes up, hopefully it's going to suck up everything out of the cylinders. I suggest you do 2 of them from the front, 2 of them from the back. And I'm going to move some stuff around and try to prep so that we can drop the intake back in down from the front. And you probably can do it alone. Going to be a 2-man job just so that nobody gets hurt, strains their back or anything like that. So yeah, welcome to day 2. Alright, for our gasket kit, we are using a Felpro MS 95728-1. These are going to be Ford 5446 gaskets. But these particular gaskets are for vehicles that were manufactured up through July of 1997. After that, the location of the guide pins changed, and you need a different kind. So the kit contains the 3 gaskets you'll need. It's actually 4, but the 3 you need for the intake proper. And then the 4th one is the paper gasket that is for the throttle body. These gaskets need to go in dry. Okay? No RTV, no cutting lube or anything like that. I would recommend taking some brake cleaner or carb cleaner and wiping down the gasket where the gaskets are going to go. Excuse me. So that it's nice and clean and there's no residues or anything. But other than that, these gaskets need to lay down. Their guide pins will make sure they lay exactly where they need to lay. And then we'll just bring the intake in on top of it and we'll get into the torque sequence. Alright, once you have your gaskets laid out, this is your final opportunity to check to make sure if you need to clean something, if you need to change out spark plugs. This is a great time to do it. It will never be easier if you're already down here. This is also a chance to make sure you've got the right gasket. Make sure that the sealing surface goes around the outside of the port that is in the cylinder head. After 1998 and beginning in 1999, the shape of the ports on the heads changed from basically a circle with a little bump to something a little more heart-shaped. Ford changed the design of the head, got a little bit more performance out of it. Make sure that your gasket goes around whatever sort of port shape you've got. Because if it doesn't, you're in for a bad time. And also make sure you have the right gasket, basically. Make sure you've got your pins, your guide pins in fully. You will have to actually push on them a little bit to get them to seat. And it should wind up looking like this. Minus throttle cables being laying back there. I'm going to bring that back around. I'll get that out of the way, and then I am pretty much ready to go ahead and bring in the intake, the upper intake, and we'll get everything lined up, because the lower kind of floats, right? It only attaches to the upper intake on its belly, and it just kind of floats here in the valley. The only thing that tethers it to anything else is this actuator valve. And from what I've read, if you've got a newer vehicle, one that's I think 99 and above, you don't even have that actuator valve. So you have a blank plate there. Anywho. Alright, so I have hand threaded all 9 of the upper intake bolts, and I have also hand threaded the 8 lower intake bolts that connect the lower to the upper. Gasket looks good in all cases. Like I said, that is a red herring right there. That's by design because you need that shape up over at the thermostat, but you don't need it back here. But to save money, the gaskets are symmetrical, the heads are symmetrical, blah, 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 blah. So this is where we're going to end part 2, where we have started reconstruction. And we will pick up part 3, putting this back in, rebuilding everything, and then continuing our flushes now that, in theory, no more coolant will be leaking into the oil. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this video. If this video helped you out, if this video is entertaining, please consider like, sharing, or subscribing. That helps to grow this channel, which helps me to bring more and new and interesting content to you. Please also leave a comment. I like to read them, I like to reply to them, and I especially like to learn from them. Also guys, remember, I make mistakes, which that's what this entire series of videos is me correcting a mistake, so you don't have to. I'll catch you guys next time.